we go. And everybody, if you want to, you can put it on speaker if you want, and then you'll see who's speaking. Also, mute yourself unless you're speaking. And now I'd like to introduce Phillippe Diederich. He's the author of the novels Playing for the Devil's Fire, which was named for the 2017 Best Young Adult Novel by the Texas Institute of Letters and 2017 Young Adult Library Services Association Best Fiction for Young Adults, and Sofrito as Vega Mysteries, The Last Girl, and The Last Breath under the pen name Danny López. In 2017, he was awarded the Penn Phyllis Naylor Working Writer Fellowship. He's the recipient of the Chris O'Malley Prize for Fiction from the Madison Review and Elizabeth George Foundation Grant, a Florida Individual Artist Fellowship in Literature from the Florida Department of Cultural Affairs, and a John Ringling Towers Grant in Literature from the Sarasota County Artists Alliance. He holds an MFA in Creative Writing from the University of South Florida. I'd like to introduce Phillippe Diederich. We've known each other for quite a while. We both went to Eckerd College, so that's where we met. So I'd like to introduce Phil. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Teresa. Thanks for inviting me. And hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So I'll just dive right into it. Thanks for that very long introduction. You should have just kept going. I forget what classes we had together, but I'm sure it was great.
Yeah, we were in a couple of Danita's classes. Danita Berg. Yeah.
I think I learned everything about writing in those classes more so than at USF. You know, really, she was great. So I was going to talk about how we choose that narrator for the story. I'm particularly focused on, you know, first person point of view narration and how that works and why, you know, I can speak about my own experience and why I make those choices. All the books that I've written are from one person's point of view. And I think choosing that point of view, like who is this person, who's the character that's going to tell the story, is one of the most important things when you're putting together a novel, or for that matter, a short story. I think that for me, I had 20 years as a photojournalist before I went to Eckerd and USF and really dove into writing. And a lot of people say that my books are like a movie. You know, I see the things that I'm explaining that my character sees. So it becomes easier for me to write from that point of view. But also my stories usually are born from a voice, from that person speaking. Like I hear the person, I say, that would be a great character. And I begin diving into how to write the story and writing the story. I don't plot and I don't outline. I just have a general sense in my mind about what I want the story to be. What is the story going to be about? I don't have an ending. I have an idea of that main character, and that main character's voice is very clear in my head. What I have learned through time is that it is easier for an editor to give you feedback and say, well, here's a plot hole, or here's a problem, or what's the motivation for this person, and to fix that, than it is to have a problem with the voice, having that main character or having the voice of the story not quite make it. That's probably the biggest flaw, that the biggest kick in the teeth when you're sending something out to get published and there's like, yeah, I didn't connect with the voice. Yeah, the voice is not strong enough for me, or it's not consistent. And that would mean revising the entire manuscript versus trying to fix a certain section. It's like, well, why did you do that? Why did your character decide to knock on that door instead of the other door? What's the motivation for that? Oh, well, that's an easy fix, which is a great thing about fiction, is that you can do whatever you want. So, but to change the entire voice, entire sense of one character through an entire novel means revising the entire novel from beginning to end based on that character. So these are lessons that I learned early on. And it took a while to kind of understand what was meant by the structure of the novel, what was meant by what I don't connect with the voice, or the voice doesn't sound authentic enough, etc. So in my writing, I also learned to do a certain amount of exaggeration towards that voice, because it's the way it comes across to the reader. So when I start writing about a specific character and I have that voice in my head, it's if I write like we normally speak, like on every day, the minutia of what we deal with, then it's boring, right? One of the, which I'm sure you guys know, one of the main instructions in writing and in screenplays is to get in at the last minute possible and get out at the first minute possible from the scene. And so in the sense, a lot of the conversation, a lot of the observations of this character can be incredibly boring. But I usually fix that on revision, because when I'm writing, I'm in a role and I'm putting everything down. That character is taking me on this journey. And the way that journey begins is with that voice that I'm talking about. Like, okay, this person is going to be in this situation and this is kind of where it's going to go. And I don't know much else, have some general ideas about where it might go. And then the beginning, I don't want to call it the first act, but the beginning, maybe the first 30 pages are easy because that voice has been in my head and this idea has been percolating. I don't get caught up with whether I'm beginning with the perfect sentence or the perfect first page. And then what happens is from page 30 to about page 100, maybe a little bit more, it gets really difficult. That beginning of sort of act 2, when things need to happen, there needs to be some meat. We're creating characterization, right? So if a reader is not falling in love with the character by a certain point, we've lost it, unless we're really focused on plot and really they're turning the page to know what happens next. But the reason why we want to know what happens next is because we care about the character. So that period from page 30 to page 100, I'm still fleshing out my character, still trying to get deeper into that, as well as kind of pulling the strings on where I'm headed with the plot. Since I don't plot beforehand, I'm like, okay, so what's happening here? Where's he going? What's going to happen next? Now, after page maybe between 90 and 120, that character that I created that is telling us a story begins to take over. Now that character is fleshed out on the page to a certain point, but he's very fleshed out in my head and his motivations are becoming clear. And so by then, that's when the writing, so people ask me, so, how much do you like writing, et cetera? Well, that page 30 to about page 100 is torture. And I hate writing at that point. But after page 100, 120, when the character begins to take over, it's a joy. I'm just listening to the character and the other secondary characters as to where we're going with this. They're making the decisions, because what would they do? It's not what I would do or where I want the story to go. So I move on like that until I come to the end. And then of course I suffer once again at the ending, because good endings are hard to come by. The idea of a surprise ending is problematic to me. Why first person? Why that point of view matters? A long time ago, I forget the name of the book, I read a novel, one of these sort of fake bestseller type novels that somebody had given me. And it was about a cameraman who, journalist, who somehow took on the cartels in Colombia. And, I read the book and it was entertaining, but when I got to the end, the book was generally from the point of view of this cameraman, but journalist, that was omniscient type narration. And at the end, he dies at the end, not sorry, spoiler alert. So he dies, and then the narrator explains that he had saved his money and gave it to his girlfriend and so on. So, happy ending for everybody that stayed alive, and it's okay. And I felt so tricked by the way that book ended that I think it left a mark in me that you got to be, if you're writing somewhat realistic fiction, that you can't trick the reader. You can't hide things from the reader that you're then going to surprise with at the end, because then the journey of the book was a fool's errand. It's not going to work, and you're going to trick someone. And I think that there's a lot of novels that are like that, but I don't want to do that with my work. And I don't think that the resolutions, happy ever after type endings, are necessarily the best endings. I think that the publishing world does like those types of endings, and things need to get resolved. But if we resolve things up to a certain point with an understanding that life will continue for these characters, and that they're not going to be in the Caribbean on a beach enjoying themselves and problem solved. And so these endings become really problematic, because you want to give a sense of growth, of resolution, and of having reached that point where things change, but at the same time, life goes on. Another thing that worked really well for me, and this is, so when you're writing from one point of view of one character, and you're sticking to that, or if you do multiple point of views, you could do that as well, like in Gone Girl or The Girl in the Train. You can do the multiple point of views, but it narrows the knowledge of that character. So what that character knows, or you explain what that character can see, or their feelings and their reactions. And the characterization is so much, I don't want to say easier, but I mean, I guess that is the word, easier to develop, because you're focused on that one person and what their prejudices are, what their background is, how they react to things, how they feel. And so it goes deeper. It allows the book to go deeper and deeper and deeper into this character that we end up hopefully loving or rooting for, and which is what fiction is about. So what I found is that those flaws in these characters that help make them better characters are also, I want to say, my flaws, but it's also my knowledge. This is especially the case with young adult fiction. So these 16, 17-year-old characters, 18-year-old characters, they don't know everything. And I don't know everything. So it makes it easier to write and explain things, and have these characters make errors that the reader sees. And I think that's a huge trick to use in all fiction, in the young adult fiction as well as in mystery fiction. And I'm assuming in horror. I haven't written horror, but the idea that sometimes the reader sees something the character does not see. And this is a great thing when reading fiction, because you as a character see the folly in this, see the problem, see what's going to happen, or afraid of what's going to happen. But the character, and this because you're reading the story, that the character doesn't know, that the character can't see it. I say, can he see that this guy is pulling his leg? Because you can see it, but the character doesn't see it. Or that that he could be the murderer. And that's, the sleight of hand that we use in mystery, where, it seems like all the suspicion is on this person there, but really that's not really going to be the murderer, or that's not going to be the person that's at fault. So that first person character is and point of view is, I don't know how to explain it. It is the genesis to me, of all my fiction, that voice and that creation of that one person who's going to travel through the story. The way I try to explain it to people is that somebody in the story is going to take your hand and take you along this journey and tell you this. And you have books like Heart of Darkness, There's other
Where's your
stories. I
water,
think that
O'Johnny?
in a sense, On the Road is a similar book that where the character that narrates is sort of slightly on the side. In Heart of Darkness, he begins telling the story to some people that are in the ship with him, or he's explaining the story, and then it goes into the novel that way. And On the Road, Salt Paradise is sort of this passive character. It's Neil Cassidy is the big motivator. Let's go. He's the crazy one. Why did Carrick decide? I mean, it is based on his friends and on real life, but why did he decide that the main character is going to be the passive one? He's going to follow Dean in this direction. These are decisions that the writer has to make, and sometimes you have to change them. When I was writing Playing for the Devil's Fire, which is a young adult novel, which has its own history of other issues, but when I was writing that draft, I had this idea. I wasn't going to write from one point of view, and I was not going to write a young adult novel. I was going to write a story about a village in Mexico that gets invaded by narcos, and how it all changes, and people who join, people who escape, people who get killed, etc. How it's all going to change the dynamics of this town. And when I was probably around page 50, I realized that there was this one kid who was just really coming out on top. I kept going back to him. His voice was so much stronger than anybody else's. He was his point of view was naive and yet knowledgeable, or not knowledgeable, but wise, if you will. And he just kept coming back to me, and I was like, maybe I should do more on him. And slowly the book became his book, and I had to go back and revise and get rid of all these other characters, and or at least their point of view, and base it on this point of view. And it made it a lot easier for certain things that I wanted to do with that book. I did not want to name the narcos. This is a book about victims and not about the aggressors. A lot has been written about the narcos, so I thought, I don't want to do that. I don't want to give them an ounce of credit for anything. I don't want to talk about them. I don't want to do the research, even though I had done a lot of research at the time. I didn't want to do the research and dive into solving a puzzle that the Mexican government, the American government, the military, journalists, nobody could solve. So it wasn't about solving the issue. It's about what happens. What happens when these guys come into town. And by focusing it on this particular character, is that I was able to not give the narcos their play. In other words, he doesn't know who they are. They're just bad guys. These new guys showed into town, and strange things are happening. They could have been aliens or zombies for that matter, but we know who they are. The reader knows, but the kid doesn't know. So anyway, even then, the novel, my agent at the time didn't see the novel as a young adult novel. It dealt with very adult themes and ideas, and we tried to sell the novel as an adult novel. And it wasn't until it went to Cinco Puntos that they said, "Oh, this is a great young adult novel," and boom, and it did its thing. But the idea is, all this just has to do with making that choice, and also understanding where it fits on the shelf in the end. After a series of rejections, even though everybody liked the book, they liked the voice, what I was talking about earlier, great character, etc. But it's just they didn't see where it fit, because nobody wanted to change it into a young adult until Cinco Puntos got a hold of it. So to me, that's kind of one of the key things. I think that I will always write from that point of view of that main character who tells us a story, because it allows us to hide certain areas of the novel and gives us other information on, for example, what we want to hide, what we want to tell. It can create mystery, fear, thriller, action. Everything is from that character's point of view, because depending on how you finesse it, the reader gets it, but the narrator might not get it. And this is the idea of that we might call it the unreliable narrator, but I think it's also the idea that characters are flawed. And if we see the flaws in your character that's narrating the story, we empathize with them a lot easier because we understand their motivations to make the mistakes that they make that lead them into trouble. Yeah, I'm sure some of us have read or seen movies where we dislike a character because they keep making mistakes, or they create their own problems. And the idea here is that one mistake, two mistakes, certain little things that make sense that somebody would that particular character would make that mistake. We empathize. If it's too much, then we start sort of like, don't be an idiot, guy. Don't do that. Don't go into that dark room, etc. So it takes a lot of measurement and a lot of balancing. And when I was saying that somewhere around page 100, the characters start writing the book themselves, that main character, their follies and their mistakes and the turns they decide to take are truly their own. And it's about listening to all the characters. When I used to teach creative writing, I had so many students would write stories with one character. And I'd say, but there's nothing going on here. So add one or two characters. And, the sort of to create an unbalance, you need your main character, and you need a folly, you need a bad guy, but the bad guy doesn't have to be, a guy in a black hat who is trying to kill someone. It could be just a friend who just makes the wrong decisions, who says, hey, let's jump that fence and see what's behind that fence and maybe steal a bike. Oh, okay. So you have this this tension that is created between the characters, and that's the nature of fiction, right? So by focusing on one main character and having that character tell the story, it sort of narrows that vision, and it makes us, it helps us understand the character. It helps us understand the decisions that they make, the mistakes that they make, and all that is human. And the more human the book is, the easier I think it is to create a book that people are going to like. But I say all this, and it's not as if I sit down to write and I'm thinking of all this. I'm giving you all this information based on my ideas that have developed over time and which work relatively organic for me. It's just after a lot of false starts, and I'm sure, Teresa, you were there with all my false starts or some of them, and then I slowly started realizing where my strengths were. Where did I find that voice? When do I listen to that voice and not this other voice? I'm writing something now. I had 2 false starts, and now I feel like I'm about to get to that. I'm trying to get to that page 100 or so where it starts taking off on its own. But meanwhile, it's just, climbing uphill to try to get to that point. But I know that it can do it because I love that character that's leading the story. I just need to get to that point where she meets these other characters and things really start moving a lot quicker and a lot more naturally. So that's my own development, right? And what I can share has to do with all these false starts that I've had, that I still have, but it has to do with how through a lot of failures, I've learned certain lessons that are working for me. I know some people plot and outline and they're adamant about that. I tried to do it once and the book just felt like I was trying to hit those points and it wasn't natural. I didn't like it, so I didn't send it out. But I realized that is not my purpose. That is not where my strength lies. So on the other hand, is that while I talk about point of view and I say that I was a photojournalist and the way I write, I'm basically walking in the steps of this character and seeing what they see, and that works really well for me and has been pointed out by people. My biggest issue in writing and where I really got the most criticism early on, and even today is incredibly difficult for me, is about what the character thinks, that internal character, right? How that character, how do I tell the audience, the reader, what the character is thinking, what they're feeling, and why? And I know we have flashbacks, and I know we have, I think this or I thought that, but you can't be overwhelming the reader with these triggers. So it's been really difficult, and it's been a journey for me because I'm more of a what you see is what you get. And so the reaction, so what they call the secondary characterization of the main character, or the characters for that matter, is how they react to things. And so we understand their who they are by how they react to certain things, and not necessarily having to go deep into their mind. But that is the hardest part for me, and that and the way that I try to fix that early on. I think I want to say that it was at Eckerd, Teresa, but it might have been at USF. Is knowing that my stories didn't have that inner tension that people have, that I wanted to put in my characters. I decided to write a story that about one person, just like the students that write a story with only one character, and nothing really happens. So I thought, I'm going to write a story about this one character. This one, for the majority of the story, he's going to be alone. He's going to be in some kind of a journey. And that was a big lesson for me. It was really, really difficult. It turned out to be one of my better short stories. And but it is just one character, so that I could, like an exercise. I saw it as an exercise in learning to do that internal mind stuff that goes on in a character. So I just, I give myself these lessons. Wherever I see the weakness in what I'm writing, I say to myself, well, why don't you write a short story that tackles that? Dialogue generally comes easier as one of my strengths. So that's great. But this, how about description? So then I work on something that's more description, etc. But there's many different ways to do that. In Marlon James, The Brief History of Seven Killings, he has multiple point of views. These Jamaicans in the ghetto at the time, and the Bob Marley shooting, and it's a very confusing book, and it's in Jamaican patois. And man, when I was reading it, I kept thinking in the Jamaican patois. My brain was absorbed in that tone. And but he does a lot of that book is internal dialogue, and an internal person narrating. I don't necessarily do that. I'm not a fan of that internal narrating. This is what I'm thinking. Well, if this guy's doing this, it's almost like telling. And we're often told to show, not to tell, which in itself has its own issues, because I'm learning that you do have to tell sometimes. You have to explain certain things. You can't just leave the reader guessing. That maybe that makes it too literary or makes it too obscure. And but if there's something I could say, is that it's to listen to our own internal workings as to how we decide what's working for us, and how we choose to say what we want to say in the novel, what our characters do, and be faithful to that. Because a lot of times what happens is we read a story on how we should write, or you're listening to me tell you how it works for me, and you think that's what I should do, and then you're forcing something for yourself that perhaps you shouldn't force. You have your own ways of creating your characters, creating your story, creating your plot, etc. You might outline, you might, write a few short stories based on certain characters to get their background, and then write the novel from there. Everybody has their own way. But I think that as writers, at least I can speak for myself and some of my friends that I've spoken with about this, is that we don't really listen often enough. We don't give ourselves enough credit for making certain decisions, and listening to how we, what we do. I have serious imposter syndrome, so I have so many doubts about what I'm writing, what I'm doing, this character, that character, that you get to over analyzing, and you can go crazy with this stuff. But we need to give ourselves credit that if we're feeling that something's not working, we should trust that it's not working, or that it should be this character that should be telling the story. And I'm saying that in the sense that, you know how many times that I've worked with editors, and the editor says, yeah, I'm having an issue with this paragraph, like what's the point of this? And I say, shit, I thought that too, but I didn't trust myself to delete it. So they say, murdered your darlings, and it might not even be a darling paragraph. It's just, but I knew it, but I didn't do it because I was scared that I was going to do the wrong thing. And pressing that delete button, is kind of scary after all that work. But a lot of times that gut feeling gets vindicated by the editor, who says, this section doesn't work, or why is this happening here? Maybe that needs to change. And I think that's the process of learning. I think every book that we work on is a learning process, not just about, writing, but also who we are and how we trust our instincts towards what we're writing. I mean, there's a reason why we write what we write, and that's because it's coming from in here. We often get asked, are you in the story? Or, is your family in the story? Who's this character based on? And it's all a part of us. Every character is a part of us somehow. And, instances come from our own experiences. And so we need to trust that what we're writing is true, and that our instinct says, do this, do that, make your character do whatever it is that he's doing or she's doing, and trust it, and go in that direction. When I think of the Raymond Chandler books, or other sort of mysteries, or even in To Kill a Mockingbird, where Scout Finch kind of does the narration, and it seems like a looking back, almost like a memoir at times, etc. It's storytelling at its core. It's what storytelling is about. Here's the story. I am not a huge fan of tricks, like I said before about that one novel where they tricked you at the ending. Surprise! The guy had saved a bunch of money, and etc. Especially if it's that large, that omniscient, God point of view, and you weren't told everything else, and you were tricked, right? By writing from the point of view of one character and making that decision that this character is going to tell the story, you are locking yourself to their point of view, their prejudices, their loves, their hates, their desires, their taste, how they dress, what cards they like, what cards they don't like, etc. It's like everything, you embody that character. And I think that's what they say about actors, that they embody, they study this person and embody this person. And even though the writer probably is the one who is the puppet master who created the situation, the actor gets all the credit because that actor embodied this individual. So to me, it just makes it a lot easier to focus on that first point of view. It makes it makes revelations a lot easier to be credible, because how could this character have known this, right? If they didn't see it, if they weren't there, if they didn't understand what this person said. So we might see it early on as an author, as a reader, but the truth of the story is in that character and how that character behaves, what motivates that character, and what they do. So it simplifies a lot of things. I've been revising a novel with an editor, and in our discussions, a lot of times it just comes up as like, I understand that he's 17. Would he make that decision, or would he say this exactly in this way? Wouldn't he know that, right? And so we have to go back to that. One example is that I have the one character, 16, 17, tells the other character, God, you sound like a TED Talk, because he gave him a lecture. And my wife, who was reading the novel, said, I don't know if he would say that. So then at dinner, I asked my children, I said, who knows what a TED Talk is, right? And they knew. So, they see him in school, et cetera. So they know early on, around middle school, early high school, what a TED Talk is. So, it's just the idea that sometimes we might have our doubts, or other readers might say, the character might not do that, but you have to trust your own characters because you're creating them, and what they say, what they do, has to fit into that personality. You're building a whole personality. So that's basically my spiel on main characters, and why you choose a point of view. And I think that the one thing that I would say is that the characters, the secondary characters that are around that main character, are the ones that help reveal a lot about your main character, especially if you're working from that internal point of view, that one person point of view. You have a situation that their reactions to them, who your main character listens to and believes is critical to that characterization. So who that character surrounds herself with, who that character decides to not go in, or to go into a certain space or a certain area, how that character reacts to outside forces, has a lot to do with who they are, their education, their upbringing, etc. So there's when we're at workshops and somebody is talking about all these elements that need to go into a character or into a story, but mainly into a character, you have to think of all these things. It's incredibly overwhelming. It's like, I'll never write a novel because I cannot. How can you encompass all that? And I think the key to that is to find that place. We can call it finding voice, but finding that place from where you can write in a more natural way, what comes natural for you. Otherwise, we're just kind of torturing ourselves. And I don't know how long it takes for each person, how much you need to read, how much you need to write, how much you need to revise to reach that point. And everybody's different. Some people can write in multiple point of views with different voices and make it work. But for me, I'm finding a certain space that, I hate to say it, has been working well since Eckert, but it's taking me a long time to accept that, to say, okay, that's what it is. This is going to be my sort of literary real estate area. It's going to deal with these types of characters, in a variety of situations, and hopefully many different other characters. But the main characters, the voice, the tone of the way that I write, it's taking me, my God, 10 years to come to a point where I feel that that's my target. That it's not about repetition, but it's about making it easier for myself. It's about recognizing that instinct, that voice comes out a lot easier. That it's not always the same voice, but it's similar. It's the same thing with young adult fiction. That at some point early on, from the Eckert days, Teresa, I was writing young adult. My characters were pretty much coming of age situations and coming into conflicts that they needed to resolve. And then I strayed from that, and it was very difficult, and I threw a lot of manuscripts away. And then, when Playing for the Devil's Fire got published as a young adult, I realized that was the space that I had been writing, even, in my short stories. And then I went further and kept trying to write outside of that scope, and then went back to it because it really is what was working. I mean, I worked about 5 years on a novel with multiple point of views, and it's still just a manuscript. And it spans, my idea here was to create a historical novel that was not told in narrative, but told in scene. And by doing multiple scenes and crossing through time to some degree, it would be more entertaining. It involves 3 or 4 mysteries that kind of mesh up together. One that comes back from the past, all kinds of crazy stuff. And, my agent's like, oh, it's a great puzzle. So, but, it's what I said early on. It's that the voices, rejections are, I love this character. That I wish I had more of this character. And then another rejection. I love this character. I wish I had more of that character. It's like, so it creates this schizophrenic sort of book that has multiple voices that I guess different people can't really latch onto. Why it works for George Saunders and Marlon James and other people is, I don't know, but it didn't really work for me. Will I revise it? I'm not really sure. It's been a lot of work for a lot of time, and I would like it to work, but at the same time, I'm finding such comfort in recognizing my space, the young adult characters that I'm kind of working with is something that just fits more comfortable, I guess, is the way. But one of the things that I did want to say, regardless of characters, is that in the end, all the books are mysteries. I know that we have a variety of different writers here, but really in the end, no matter what it is I'm writing, it's about finding something, right? Even a literary story, it's about finding oneself, right? It ends with this revelation about who we are, or the character kind of realizing something about their life. And it took me a long time to realize that, is that you turn the page because you want to know what happens to those characters, whether they're trying to solve a mystery that happens early on, or that they're in some kind of trouble that they're trying to get out of, or that something's going on in their life that they need to resolve. And in a sense, it's finding that. It's not the traditional whodunit per se, but it is the idea that that something has to be happening. I've read some books that are beautifully written where not much happens, and kind of boring. During pandemic, I've been reading some old Russian literature that doesn't take the point of view of one individual. And, these were written as series by Tolstoy, kind of the way Dickens used to do. And they're just like these long soap operas, and you like them because of the characters, and you want to know what happens with these characters, but you don't care about these ones. These didn't interest you as much, but that doesn't mean that somebody else wasn't interested in those characters and not in that character that you like. But of course, that's a larger scope of a certain type of literature that had its time, and that is great to read back on. We really are up against a lot of media now with videos and YouTube and films and the internet. So writing just kind of takes this, like, how do we, who has the patience for a 50-page development before you can get into a character or something like that? What is it, what they say? You read the first couple pages, and if it doesn't hit you, you don't want to read it. So I think that that voice, that being deep in that character will, really helps the stories and the novel stand out early on. And that's kind of my spiel. Want me to say anything else?
No, I wanted to ask you, between your YA novels, which I haven't read, but I've read Sofrito and I've read your Danny López ones. Do you approach them differently, or or you hear Dexter Vega's voice and when you're writing as Danny López? Do you sit down and put your Danny López hat on? We should clarify that you use a pen name when you write the Dexter Vega novels.
What pen name do you use?
I used Danny López.
Danny López?
Yeah, cross between Danny DeVito and George López.
Oh, wait a minute. Danny DeVito and George López. All right, I'm the secretary. I'm gonna get a list of your books and write them in our minutes with your pen names.
Sure.
Danny DeVito and George López.
Well, yeah, that's just that's how I got the pen name.
Okay.
The pen name is Danny López, and I,
López?
yeah, and you know, it's been a journey. Sofrito, Teresa, it's actually a book that I started in 2001. And I didn't know what I was doing. And I remember I got a letter from an agent after a million rejections that actually gave me some feedback as to what was wrong with the novel. It was a really nice letter, really nice of an agent to do something like that. And basically was telling me that the structure was all over the place. And I didn't know what that meant. So I asked a couple of my writer friends, what is the structure of a novel? What is meant by the structure? And nobody could answer me that question. Nobody could say, oh, well, the structure involves X, Y, Z. So I went to Barnes and Noble because at the time, you know, the internet was very much in its infancy, and you know, Google, you couldn't get all the answers necessarily. And I went to Barnes and Noble and bought a book that was titled How to Structure Your Novel. So that book taught me that, hey, you got to pick a point of view. You got to, you know, you got to pick a time. You got to have a timeline. You got to have a sense of, you know, a flow. There has to be some sort of meter or timing to the way, you know, you create things. So I was like, my God, I didn't know all this stuff. So I wrote and wrote and wrote and rewrote and revised for a good 10 years. So in 2010, it had been revised a number of times, and it was in pretty good shape, but it just wasn't hitting the note, and it wasn't getting accepted. So I revised it again while I was in grad school a little bit, and I had gotten some feedback from a couple of agents, and I made some changes, and then Cinco Puntos published it. And I think that what happens with Sofrito is that it's a journey through Havana, right? And it doesn't fall into the trope or the basically the shelf of I'm an immigrant from Cuba and here's my experience, which is kind of what hits in this country really well. You know, Cristina Garcia's Dreaming in Cuban, or some of the work by Edwidge Denticott and other immigrant writers is usually about, you know, coming to America and the struggle and making it, or longing for the old country or that connection. And you know, Sandra Cisneros also dealing, you know, House on Mango Street and the disconnect and connect from Mexico. And so it didn't fit into that. And maybe that was part of it, I don't know. But with the Dani López, it was a different thing. It was, I realized that what I was writing kind of involved a mystery. Sofrito's about finding a recipe. So there's a mystery. It's a mystery for foodies, right? Devil's Fire is this kid trying to find his parents. And so I said, well, I'm going to do something that's more local, that's here. So I want to do kind of like a beach read or something, you know, just, I felt like my writing just, you know, Sofrito's more of a Miami book, and Devil's Fire is more of a Texas, you know, Southwest book. And so I was writing from here, and some friends had just gotten laid off from the Herald Tribune, you know, all that was going on. And yeah, you know, I lived in Sarasota on and off since the mid 80s, and I've seen it change from this small town to this, you know, playground of the rich and famous, I suppose. I don't know. And not all of it makes me happy. All the condos downtown and the expensive rents and the loss of all the mom and pop places, and the fact that we don't have a place that's been around for 50 years, you know, from other places that I lived at, where you got these traditions, these places that are, you know, that anchor a town, you know. And so that was kind of the genesis for Dani López, was that I wanted to write something about that. And then the Last Breath had to do with the arguments, the fight that there was over Beach Road and Siesta, and the building of condos once again, you know, real estate. But, you know, that's the classic Florida thing, the real estate mysteries. So yeah, I haven't written another one, and I haven't really thought about it because I've been working on some other stuff. And I mean, I'll probably come up with something at some point. But it's just that I actually, when I thought of Dexter Vega as a character, I made him somewhat Mexican American in the sense that that's also, because that's a lot of my point of view with all my other writing, my short stories, and playing for the Devil's Fire. I realized that that's where my more natural voice comes from. And for those who don't know, I grew up in Mexico City, so a lot of it just comes from that. So in book 3 or 4 of the Danny López series, my idea, he kind of alludes to this in the other novels and the 2 that are out, is that he saw his father get shot by a cop in Texas, when they lived when he grew up in outside San Antonio. And so eventually that was all going to come out through the series, or will come out through the series if I continue with that.
Martha wants to know if you do a 3-act model.
I don't. I do and I don't. I mean, I think that the pacing of the book are all basically work on a 3-act premise. So then, but I don't cut it up that way. I write very organically. That like, here's this character, something happens, he gets involved, he resolves. I mean, it ends up being the 3 characters, 3-act structure. I don't turn it into this has to happen at this point or this has to happen at that point. I think, in Devil's Fire and in the first Danny López book, the hook is immediate. The first sentence in the Devil's Fire is, basically the hook is, it was a hot Sunday morning when we discovered the severed head of Enrique Quintanilla propped on the ledge of one of the cement planters in the plaza. So you start with an immediate, oh shit, what's this? Sofrito's, it takes a little bit longer for it to happen when they discovered that there is, there's a whole process to discovering that there is this recipe that the family owned in Cuba that they want to go back and get it, which is a catalyst for them going back to Cuba. So it does work. And I think that, I do work in the 3-act without being very specific about doing it that way. But the one thing that I would say is that when I was talking about doing that from page 30 to page 100, right, that is really difficult for me. That's part of the second act. That's the beginning of the second act, right? So when I'm thinking of a story and I got this voice and I say, oh, it's going to be about this character and he's going to be like this and this is what his family is going to be like. It's going to be crazy and he's going to end up going to Cuba, or he's going to end up, his parents are going to disappear. He's going to try to find his parents. So when I do that, what happens is that's the first act. I figured out kind of the first act, but that leads me to this turn right at the end of the first act. And then I start writing the second act, and that's when it gets tedious. And then halfway through the second act, the characters take over and help me finish that second act. And then the third act, then the third act leads to the ending that I always have trouble with, but that we always end up resolving. And as a matter of fact, I'm working with an editor who actually put part 1, part 2, part 3 in the novel. And he said, let me know if these are okay, if this is where these would go. And, we discussed the third one, exactly where it is, whether it's right when the climax starts happening or if it's a little bit before, et cetera. But yeah, so it ends up being, if I think that you need to work with what works for you. And I think the 3-act is working well for me. And, trust me, I want my books to be commercial and sell millions and millions and gazillions of copies and make me rich so I can give everybody money. But, and that's what works in many ways, but I never set out to reinvent the wheel of writing. I'm not a literary writing. I enjoy reading books that are clever, but, after the torture of trying to write from 3 different point of views through a course of time, et cetera, and scene, I just think that telling a good story is what matters, telling a good story that's close to my heart.
Harold had a question. Harold, do you want to ask it? I'm afraid I won't ask it right.
Yeah, I write in first person. except in first person when my protagonist is on the scene, but third person when he is not. So as an example, when somebody is being murdered, well, obviously my protagonist isn't there because he's the one who's got to solve the murder. Is that an acceptable way of doing it?
I don't see why not. I think that it's a question of consistency. It's a question of how do you divide from that character to being off scene when something happens. So if that is a chapter break or if that is just a section break, and also that the way that works is consistent throughout the novel, right? Throughout the story, so that we know that that's what we're expecting. That's why a lot of books that are multiple point of view sometimes have shorter sections, because it gets you a chance to understand that this book is going to be written this way, that this is what you're going to read, this is the way it's going to be structured. And so you know, by page 30 or something like that, you understand, oh, we're going to be going from 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, or back and forth, etc. I think that if it's working for you, one of the things that I would look at is whether when something is happening outside of that character's point of view, then is the voice, is the way that narration goes different? How is that different from when you have your character? So that even if you have breaks, the reader can understand that now we're in this space and not in this space.
Good, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Okay. I was just reading Sarah's comment.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
I'll make a quick announcement.
sure.
I just sent out an email which has the incorrect link to the video commercial. So ignore sending out a new one with the correct link. I just
Okay.
want to let you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
I
right.
suppose,
Go on.
I'm just seeing her comment about a lot of different viewpoints. And what I would say is that I don't think that there are rules for structure, but I think that when things work, no matter how they're put together, they work. And in the end, it's going to be your battle. I think that, I was told many times in creative writing classes at Writers in Paradise, not to write multiple point of views. But, I think writing multiple point of views is a great way to build upon a mystery. Different people have different views. They have different prejudices. They have different perspectives on what might have happened or who the suspect is, who the murderer is. So I don't think that there's a hard and fast rule. I think you need to find, like I said before, what feels kind of comfortable for you, and what you want to tackle in your novel, and what is the best way to reveal what you want to reveal in your novel. If a certain character is your main character and you're writing from that point of view, and then you get to the end and you're like, well, that won't work because he doesn't know this. So then, you come up, you have a problem. You have to resolve that. If that means redoing the novel in a different point of view or changing it to multiple point of views. I mean, that's what worked with Gone Girl and with Girl on the Train. It's the fact that they have different point of views. It confuses the readers, like who's right and who's wrong. These are the more unreliable narrators you have, the better, right? The more confused the reader is going to be with the mystery, and is going to be surprised at the end or can't solve the mystery. But really, in the end, it's up to you. I think that to me, I just feel like the least complicated to write a good story. You just write a good story. If it takes 2 characters to tell the story or 3 characters to tell the story, then so be it. It just has to be done in a way that doesn't confuse the reader, that the reader doesn't feel tricked. At least that one of my pet peeves is that reading a book and feeling tricked at the end, or by a reader, by the writer at some point, or feeling like they were lazy in figuring something out.
We can't hear you, Teresa.
Any other questions? Sarah, I really like your baby. Well, if there's no other questions, thank you so much, Phil. I really enjoyed it, your talk. And our next meeting is on April 10th. And in March, have the reading festival. So hope to see everybody there. Phil, and see you next month.
Bye, thanks for having me.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you. Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you.
So we won't see you in March.
Thanks, everybody. Very nice.
Okay.
We'll see you at the
March
festival.
is the reading festival, so we can't. Yes, we'll be at the festival.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Linda, I hope you get your appointment.
I
Me
did.
too.
It came
Me
through.
too.
I did.
Did?
Yeah.
You did? Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I
Thank you.
didn't get mine. I'm still waiting for it to come through.
Oh, boy. I just got it a little while ago, next Tuesday.
Congrats.
Maybe they'll still call. I'm still
Great.
waiting.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Oh,
Thank you.
My number is so high. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.